We've got another recount here in Minnesota. I mean, the first question that I think people here in Minnesota and probably all over the country have is, what are the similarities and what are the differences between this recount between Democrat Mark Dayton, Republican Tom Emmer for governor, and the recount 2 years ago between Franken and Coleman?
Well, the first major major gap between the two is the voting gap between the two. At this time, and right now, we're still in the kind of the shakeout phase of each county. We have 87 counties here in Minnesota, shaking out all their votes just to make sure they found them all, and also that the county auditors along the way have done all their math correctly, so that someone didn't write 1,472 when it should be 1,742, that kind of stuff. But at this point in 2008, after all the votes shook out, Norm Coleman was ahead by 215, Al Franken behind by 215. Now, Mark Dayton, the DFLer here, is ahead by about 8,700 votes, 8,700. So you can see the order of magnitude is significantly higher. And that gap, though, between him and Tom Emmer still falls within Minnesota's recount threshold, which is 0.5%. Right. There's about 2.1 million votes out there right now, I'm pretty sure. So if you do the math, Dayton has got to climb somehow above about 11,000 votes to jump out of the recount zone.
I think right now we're at 0.42% or something like that.
Yeah, and so in every election, voting tallies jump a little bit. We just don't know it because we don't care. Here in Minnesota, in Norm Coleman's election of 1998 against Jesse Ventura for governor, and then in the 2006 race, Amy Klobuchar and Mark Kennedy, there were thousands of votes that went one way or the other, but we didn't care because it was clear that Ventura won or Amy Klobuchar had won. So this is not unusual, and so that's one big, gapping between the two. A big similarity is what's at stake. Nationally, of course, Al Franken was to become the 60th Democratic senator.
Or the 59th, right? I mean, Arlen Specter hadn't yet.
Right. But by the time the recount ended and the collection contest ended, he became the 60th again.
Yeah.
Early on, there was a runoff in Georgia, and there was that period of time where we weren't sure if he'd be the 60th. Then he was the 59th. Then Arlen Specter switched, and so by the time this whole saga ended in July of 2009, he became the 60th for that very short period of time before Scott Brown was elected for Ted Kennedy's spot. Here in Minnesota now, the Republicans have won the House and the Senate. If Tom Emmer were somehow to win this recount, the Republicans would control all the branches, both chambers, and the executive. So for the Democrats, making sure that Dayton does in fact win the recount is important. So there's a lot at stake here in the state. So I think, generally speaking, those are the big honkin' issues of the voting difference, and then what's at stake. There's another thing that's going on here, though, and that is in 2008, the spirit of Florida of 2000 was hanging over this recount, and the spirit of Paul Wellstone was hanging over this recount. Franken was motivated, inspired by Paul Wellstone's politics. That's why he was running. Norm Coleman was the senator who won because Paul Wellstone unfortunately died in a plane crash, just 10 days before. And the Democrats nationally wanted to avenge, to a certain extent, the 2000 recount in Florida. Right. Here we now have the Republicans sort of remembering the Alamo, but the Alamo is 2008. And so we have a lot of motivated Republican operatives and lawyers and nationally saying, don't let us lose again in Minnesota. And they're taking some of the tactics and strategies that the Franken recount campaign used in this recount because they're behind. And when you're behind, you have a whole nother mindset than if you're ahead. So I'm not saying that there's a seamless continuum between 2008 and 2010, but it's part of the same story a bit,
We saw a really fired up and perhaps even angry GOP chair Tony Sutton late last week. Tom Emmer is holding a news conference at 1 p.m. today. I think his first real public appearance since election night. Are we going to see a fired up, angry Tom Emmer, or are we going to see a cool character who's going to hide behind his lawyers for the next few weeks?
Well, Tom Tom Emmer doesn't take advice from me, and I can't read his mind. But if I were he, I would be the not dispassionate, but I would be the calm. Let's let the process work guy. Tony Sutton, who's the chairman of the GOP here, just last Wednesday, the day after the election, practically exploded with not anger so much as of energy and a certain amount of skepticism that the election was fair. And he again evoked 2008, saying that Franken stole the election, or he more than implied that he tiptoed right there, and making sure that the Republicans don't get rolled again is what he said. If I were Tom Emmer, I would say we're going to have a recount. I know there's a wide gap. Elections change. We've got attorneys who are going to see if there were any irregularities, and we're going to see if the canvassing votes add up. And let's just let the process play out. An important thing to me, if I were a candidate, and I never will be and have never been one, is in a recount, election officials count the votes. I don't get the psychology, Tony Sutton's psychology, of criticizing the people who are going to count the votes. It doesn't really make sense. And I also think it tends to delegitimize the entire election process. Now, that might be a tactic, or might be a message that the loser, or the person who's behind, wants to project. This system is messed up. The Minnesota electoral system doesn't work. Mark Ritchie, the Secretary of State, is tainted, all those kinds of things. I think generally, and this is just my opinion, most Minnesotans don't believe that. Some people might, a small core of people might. So I think that Mr. Sutton, who's undoubtedly the most entertaining political figure in Minnesota right now, I think he overreached a little bit, and we haven't really heard that much from him over the last week. I think he stepped back a little bit. I think he gave one other little interview, but it's been calmed. So I could be totally wrong, and in an hour and a half or so, we might see Tom Emmer come out swinging. Yeah. I don't understand what that would get him, unless there's some announcement that they found an irregularity of super proportions that will get him close to that 9,000 votes. Just to put into perspective what the 9,000 votes equals. We just talked about Franken-Coleman, and that gap swung from 215 with Coleman ahead to 312 at the end of the recount and the election contest, so swing of about 500 votes. We had a gubernatorial recount here in 1962, and that one swung from 58 to 91. Actually, the same guy won. There was a 58 at the start, then there was a recount, the other guy went ahead, but in the end, the winner won by 91. So in many ways, there was just an increase of 35 votes. The Christine Gregoire Dino Rossi recount in Washington State in 2004-2005 was a swing of a matter of hundreds of votes. And a very famous recount in Indiana in the 8th Congressional District, 1984, was less than 100 votes when it all was said and done, and it maybe got up to 200. There's been no recount that people who follow this can cite, statewide or a congressional district, that has, A, changed the result, and or if it has changed the result, has been anywhere in these thousands of votes. In fact, there are a number of states that have 2,000, the total 2,000, as the recount threshold, and if you're higher than that, you can't even have an automatic recount. Just that's a handful of states. So this 9,000 gap is something that could only be insurmountable if there's some fundamental flaw in the election.
Right. Or it only could be surmountable, right? I mean, it could only be...
Exactly, yeah. Exactly. I mean, the only way that is if there's been some mega mistake, I would say. And I guess, time will tell. That's why we do have, a recount. And I'm sure I know that the Republicans are looking for any irregularities, that they can find. But when they do find one, they're going to have to make sure that it reaches into that 9,000 realm. And remember, if you find votes, I'm making this up because we don't know anything. If you find votes, if you find ballots, that doesn't all mean they would go for Tom Emmer. There was the third candidate here, and Mark Dayton. And one issue that was very important, you asked about what's the same, what's not the same about 2008, is the rejected absentee ballots was a very critical issue in the Franken-Coleman recount. There were 12,000 rejected absentee ballots in 2008, and of those, after all sorts of court work and activities by both parties, we got down to 1,347 wrongly rejected absentee ballots. So a little bit less than 10, about a little bit more than 10%. This year, according to the Secretary of State's office, we only have 3,000 rejected absentee ballots. And according to Joe Mansky, who's the elections official in Ramsey County, where St. Paul is, and is sort of the dean of election officials, in Ramsey County, he saw none that were improperly turned down. So the 3,000 that have been turned down out of our 2 million votes were all screwy ballots done by sloppy voters. So that harvesting of votes that the Franken side did from absentee ballots doesn't seem to be there for Tom Emmer. And even if it were there, and assuming all 3,000 of them were wrongly rejected, and assuming all 3,000 of them went for Tom Emmer, he still wouldn't be anywhere near 9,000.
We're seeing some of the same lawyers on the battlefield, in particular David Littlehog, representing Dayton, who represented Franken 2 years ago. I mean, obviously, his side was behind initially 2 years ago. They caught up, surpassed Coleman, and held on. Will he, use some of the same tricks from his strategy 2 years ago? What are his days like right now, Littlehog?
Well, David Littlehog, former U.S. attorney, is actually sort of the number 2 guy in the Dayton legal hierarchy now, and Charlie Nowen, who was a lawyer for citizens for Franken, is the numero uno. But David yesterday was in Minneapolis and Hennepin County. That's where he's based, and I think he might turn out being a little bit more of the face of the Dayton side because he's well known. But it's my understanding that the chief legal strategist in person is going to be Nowen. But they were with Franken, obviously, and they have not brought in any national forces this year yet, like Al Franken did in 2008. On the other hand, the Coleman side has brought in a man named Michael Toner, who was the chairman of the Federal Election Commission, a respected Republican attorney. But they also have some of the same faces: Tony Trimble, who represented Norm Coleman, and Matt Hopoya, who works with Trimble. No, the tricks will be different. That is, the messages will be the same, but the uniforms will change. The Dayton side is now saying everything's fine.
Right.
They're not saying we don't need a recount because it is automatic, but they're saying sort of what I just said, which is this is insurmountable, and let's not delay and let's not play games. And Dayton, in his first appearance last week, said the clock is ticking and he's got work to do and he should be sworn in on January 3rd. And actually, a little bit to their credit, the new leaders of the Republican and House and Senate caucuses also said yesterday that they don't plan on playing any games. That's what they seem to say. On the flip side, the Emmer position, the Republican position in 2008 was let's have Al Franken step back, let's let the healing begin. This thing is over. That came back to bite Senator Coleman a bit in the rear end when he kept going on and on. But their view is, and Tony Trimble is actually using some of the same language that I've written about. I haven't mentioned my book yet, have I? I have a book.
Not yet.
Yeah, okay.
Shameless.
Shameless. Where I talk about how the Franken side looked under every rock and stone for votes, and Mr. Trimble is using those words now. And in fact, the Republicans announced yesterday this whole operation of volunteers and lawyers who are going to be out in the 87 counties in search of votes. So the tactics, the Republicans are picking up what the Franken side did in 2008, and the Dayton team is not saying exactly what the Coleman team said, but it's the same sort of attitude of this is done, let's get this over. And when you're ahead, and you want it to be over.
Right.
And when you're behind, you want to keep on playing, and it doesn't matter what team you're on, as it were. So that's it's not comical because this is important business, but it's a little comical.
I'm going to liquid sound check to make
You
sure
bet.
we're rolling good.
Yeah, we should be fine.
Great. Obviously, to borrow President Obama's words, the Democrats suffered a shellacking on Tuesday nationwide. The Republicans must be really fired up. We know that as a party, or their support groups have funneled plenty of cash into this campaign following the Citizens United Supreme Court ruling, and a lot of of the victors in Tuesday's election, Republicans benefited from plenty of cash. I mean, it seems as if obviously this recount that's happening right now is an automatically triggered recount, and it's publicly funded. I mean, how, if for some reason Dayton were to surpass the 0.5 percentage point threshold, which would then render the automatic recount mute, is there a chance that Emmer and the Republicans and the state GOP, and perhaps even with help from the national GOP, would fund a recount?
Well, this will be, and I'm not exactly sure when this is going to run, but this could be one of the issues that Emmer might talk about today. I guess I don't know. Well, actually, I believe this is the case. I might be wrong, but if somehow in the recount Dayton jumps above the point, the 0.5%, Tom Emmer could still file an election contest, which would be a lawsuit talking about irregularities. And Tony Trimble pointed out yesterday, I haven't had a chance to read the law, but I think that he's correct, that in a U.S. Senate race, the irregularity issue goes to the Senate in D.C. And it's the Senate itself that determines whether there were irregularities and whether a senator can be seated. Trimble's assertion was that here in the state of Minnesota, irregularities would be ruled on by a court and not by the Senate. So there's more than a nuance there of what they could do with the irregularities. The question still remains, who got the most legally cast votes? And so even if you have an election contest, and let's say in your scenario Dayton's ahead by 11,000, some court's going to have to rule that there were 11,000 votes that were screwy and that all of them would have gone to Emmer. I think the real question, though, is the following. Let's say we remain within that recount zone, and the recount is completed, and the canvassing board, which is the administrative board that hears it first, says, yes, Mark Dayton, we certify, has gotten the most votes. And now we're at December 14th, which is the date that has been set for the board to meet. Will Tom Emmer then attempt to file, or will he then file an election contest, sue as it were, and create a trial mode so that it goes beyond the January 3 date that Tim Pawlenty is set to be out of office and Mark Dayton or Tom Emmer is set to be in? That's where the rubber will really meet the road. If the irregularities don't seem substantial, and if Mark Dayton still leads by 8,000 votes, to me, the recount will become far more political than legal or PR mode. The Franken-Coleman recount operated on 3 levels. One was legal, one was political, and one was PR, was the messaging, the use of YouTube, the use of the UpTake, the use of websites to make sure that people knew that their absentee ballots were counted or weren't counted. There were dueling press conferences every day. There was a lot of stuff going on in different ways. Right now, because of Dayton's lead, it seems to me that the only way that Emmer can win, unless again there's some dramatic finding that we're not aware of, is to somehow make people believe that the election was tainted, and then the only way that Dayton can intercept an Emmer attempt to challenge the election is to say to Minnesotans, hey, I'm ahead by 8,000 votes or whatever it might be. They're just game playing here. Right. This is not how we do things in Minnesota. It seems to me that the new House Speaker and the new Senate Majority Leader were saying the same thing, because one of the scenarios is Tim Pawlenty remains in office, the Republicans send a budget to him rather than to Mark Dayton, and the Republican budget and other issues get passed under Tim Pawlenty. It seems like they're saying they don't want to do that. Right. To your question, I think we need to see exactly if Tom Emmer, if he believes he has a political career beyond this, and if he does and wants to have one, I don't think that would bode all that well, except to the core of his party, the base. And Tim Pawlenty, how would that play nationally if he were involved in this sort of, I'll use this word, this sort of coup of some sort, where he stays in office? Would it benefit him as he runs for president to show that he's a Republican all the way, or would it harm him as someone who's not being Minnesotan enough, being fair? I don't really know the answer to that, and hopefully it won't come to that. But I think that's what that's what the Democrats are talking more about, is how are we going to stop this lawsuit if it comes down the pike?
Right. Let's talk about your book a little bit.
Okay.
Tell us the title, publisher, when it came out, how it's been received, and does another Minnesota Recount now help you sell copies?
Yes, I'd like to thank the people of Minnesota for for being completely undecided on everything. Well, it's a regional book, and so it sells a certain amount of copies, but not millions and zillions. It's called "This Is Not Florida: How Al Franken Won the Minnesota Senate Recount." And it is a saga, it's a tale, it's not a legal treatise. It's a fly-on-the-wall sort of drama, thriller, I hope, although everybody knows the ending, about decisions made and not made, mostly by the Franken team, but also by the Coleman team. Everybody, so I covered every day of this for MinnPost, the website here in the Twin Cities, and wrote about it every day, pretty much. I missed one day of the trial, a couple days of the canvassing board. And everybody, every player in the recount, both sides, lawyers, operatives, whatever, spoke to me and the back reporting that I did afterwards, except for Senator Coleman and Ben Ginsberg, who was his chief spokesman. Ben Ginsberg told me why he wouldn't talk to me, which was, I don't have anything to say, we lost. But Senator Coleman never responded. But other than that, so I've talked to all sides of it. So it isn't a partisan ripping thing, and it's more of a tale. And I know that a lot of the Republican lawyers who are working on the case right now, on the Dayton Emmer thing, have read the book, because I write, I think, somewhat of a template for how a recount, when you're behind, should be run. It's been received, well. Again, I haven't heard, other than a couple of blog posts by really partisan Republicans who still believe the election was stolen. That I didn't write much about the felon voting issue, which really didn't come up until after the book was completed, and which I believe has been exaggerated, quite a bit. But the New Yorker gave me a nice little review. It's been nicely reviewed in all the insider, book world type things. I was on C-SPAN. I know you're a competitor. I actually in the book, I call the UpTake the psychedelic C-SPAN, is what I call it. And
Thank you.
You bet. So I've been on C-SPAN, have had some good book appearances both in Washington and here and in Seattle. So it's going great. I'm happy with it, and it's not a book that I hope people go pick it up and go, ugh, this is a boring lump of goo. I've been told that it's entertaining. So
It's narrative journalism. Well, congratulations on all the success, and thank you for mentioning the UpTake. A question about Senator Al Franken. I mean, here 2 years ago, he wins an election by 312 votes. Some would say, the election was flawed. And yet, he's the 60th senator, which gives them veto majority and plays a big role in leading to the health care reform passaging. So he had so much weight on his shoulders coming to Washington. He was so anticipated, and yet he had virtually tied. Did he have a mandate? And did he perceive that he had a mandate?
Well, even though this book is called How Al Franken Won the Senate Recount, I've spent about an hour and 20 minutes of my life with Al Franken, so it's not like we're big pals. I had one good interview with him during the campaign, during the recount, when the word was out already that I was about to start on the book. And then I spoke very briefly with him a couple more times, and then his rule was once he was sworn in, he was not going to talk about the recount. But in Franken watching that I've done, no, he did not have a mandate, and he knew he didn't have a mandate. And if there's anything that will humble someone, it's if he or she wins by 300 votes out of 2.9 million. No, he didn't have a mandate. I don't think he felt that, but he was elected. He did have that spot of the 60th vote. He campaigned on supporting, reform in health care. So he was following what he campaigned on. So if that's what you've asked, I mean, he did what he was supposed to do, right. And then things changed, and he was number 59 again. One of the things that he did do, and this has been written, a lot during that first year in office, was Hillary Clinton's chief of staff, whose name I forget, advised Franken as he began to move into the Senate, and she, coming out of a different experience, had been told to no national TV interviews, don't talk to Rolling Stone, don't go on Jon Stewart, just put your head down and go to work.
Because he was a freshman?
Not only because he was a freshman, because he was such a lightning rod, and because he was a celebrity candidate.
Yeah.
So let's do the sort of counterintuitive thing and make him the non-celebrity. In fact, let's make Senator Franken, who might be the most exciting personality in the Senate, as boring as we can for this, and just let him get to work. He is a policy wonk. You know, Al Franken is a wonky guy.
Right.
He's very smart. He's extremely funny. But the idea was to make sure that he's as senatorial as he can be, and not, you know, the Saturday Night Live comedian. And to this day, so now he's been in since July 7, 2009. So we're into what, month 16 of or even more than that. I've lost track. He has not done many national interviews. They did begin to trot him out during this campaign to help some candidates, because Al Franken is a automatic teller machine in terms of fundraising. He can really do fundraising. But he has been very Minnesota focused. He's followed kind of the Wellstone model of, you know, he's back in the state often, as do most Minnesota, you know, politicians, except some House members who lose in upsets, I guess. So I've kind of rambled off of your question, but he knew he didn't have a mandate. In fact, he joked about that when Scott Brown was elected in the special election after Ted Kennedy died, and there was a movement afoot by the Democrats to delay Scott Brown's seating in the Senate, and Franken opposed that delay, and he said something like, "This guy won by 100,000 votes. I won by 312. I think we should let him in." You know, so he understood the, you know, the razor thin nature, and he also understands how I can't even imagine how nasty 2014 is going to be when he runs again. You know, it is going to be just, you know, who knows what's going to happen between now and then.
Right.
But boy, oh boy, whoever the Republicans put up, and you know, the moment he was sworn in, Tony Sutton was the new chairman of the Republican Party, basically said the campaign's on 2014. You know, so you know, Senator Franken does have a weight on his shoulder because everybody's watching him, and as far as I can tell so far, he's doing a fine job.
Maybe it'll be Tom Emmer running against him. Who knows?
I'm going to guess that, you know, I know nothing at all.
Right.
I know nothing. But I'm going to guess that somebody like Michelle Bachmann, you know, could be a candidate, and there'd be some stark choice there. That would just be a name, you know, that would emerge right now. Tim Pawlenty.
Right.
You know, I don't know. I don't think it would be Tom. I can't imagine it would be Tom Emmer, even if he should somehow win this recount. If he wins the recount, he will be rerunning for governor.
Right. Right. I mean, in terms of critically evaluating or critically appraising Franken's nearly first 18 months in office, I mean, he obviously granted a big push with the health care reform. What else has he accomplished or helped to accomplish, and what has he fallen short on?
You know, I got to admit, I'm not an expert on all that he's done. I've been following other things, and I've been doing this book. I think, as a citizen and not as a reporter, it just seems to me that he has put his nose to the grindstone, and he's worked. He's taken on some, you know, little issues that are important to him, but he's taken on, I mean, they're little compared to war and peace, but he's very much into broadband, you know, in rural Minnesota. He's very much into Veterans Affairs. He has talked about, you know, this whole Comcast NBC merger. As a former NBC employee, you know, there are all sorts of stories of the NBC people knocking on his door and saying, "Hey, Al," and him just not being very friendly to the notion of such a big merger. He's been very involved in the Supreme Court appointments, and has been very outspoken. In fact, gave a very well-received speech here in Minnesota before Elena Kagan was approved by the Senate about the increasingly political nature of the court, and some people thought that was the best speech that any senator had given about the path that the Supreme Court is taking. So I know I'm forgetting lots of stuff because I haven't really been a Franken watcher, but I don't think there's anybody who can say he's been a lazy bum. You know, he's been working his rear end off, and I did happen to see him at a book event that I had for my book, and like every senator, I'm sure, he was like there for 7 minutes, then he had to go somewhere else. You know, these guys are at least the ones who are working hard, are totally planned. And, you know, he comes in 30 seconds before, it was a surprise to me that he showed up. But I'm sure he came in 30 seconds before he was supposed to, and he left like 6.5 minutes after he was there. So he's working hard.
Assuming a Mark Dayton victory here for governor, not quite the razor-thin mark that pushed Franken into the senatorial seat, but still, you know, following a recount. I mean, following a virtual tie, and now with the Minnesota House and Senate that's now Republican, what will Dayton? What will Dayton be able to get done? Will he have something of a mandate, or will he have to become something of a centrist because he virtually tied and he's got to now work across the aisle?
It's gonna be really tough. I've been around. I've covered the legislature off and on for about the last. Let's see, 1996, how long ago is that? The last 15 years, mostly around stadium issues. I was a sports writer, and I covered ballpark politics. So I know how contentious it can get there. You know, Mark Dayton, I think, is kind of a top-down kind of a guy. I don't know I'm not sure how much of a deal maker he is. I really don't know his MO that much, but I know that he says that Rudy Perpich, who was a governor here in the 80s, is his hero or his model, and Rudy Perpich was an executive, a CEO, and I don't know how much he compromised. I'm not quite sure, but obviously this notion of a mandate, even though he might win by 8,000 votes, he only got 43% of the vote. Okay, so 50, Tom Horner, the third party candidate, got 12%. Tom Emmer, 55% of the people voted against him, you could argue. The same way in the Franken-Coleman thing, more than 50% of the people, actually in their case it was like 58% of the people, because Dean Barkley had 16%. So you can talk about margins, but you also have to talk about who didn't vote for him. So it's going to be very tricky because Mark Dayton, campaigned on increasing taxes, the income tax, and the Republicans ran on no new taxes at all. And now Emmer's position was that we don't even have a deficit in the state, which most people just didn't agree with at all. We obviously do, but his view was we have to live within our means, and so just cut back on our spending. And the Republican caucus, though, seems not to be as dogmatic about that. We obviously have to plug in our hole, and we have to find some new revenues somehow. It will be fascinating to see how this gets done, and even though they have control of the House and the Senate. I just saw an item, I believe in Politics in Minnesota, the news website here, that if you add up all the votes statewide, it's hundreds of votes between the Democrats and the Republicans in the House and the Senate. So even though the Republicans have got more seats, when you begin to see exactly how much they won by, it's probably less than the 9,000 totally than Mark Dayton did. So nobody there has got a mandate.
Absolute gridlock. Last question, because Emmer goes on a little over an hour. You've talked about today and anticipating how Emmer might react today. What else, day by day, the next kind of week and a half, are you looking to see, and are you most interested in it as a journalist for the MinnPost?
Well, on Friday the 12th, so this coming Friday, every county has to have its canvass done. So by Monday, presumably, because all the numbers won't come in, it's got to get to the Secretary of State's office. But maybe by the end of the day, Friday, 8 p.m., we'll have a real feel for where the numbers stand on the canvas. And then on the 23rd of November, 10 days later, the canvassing board will meet for the first time to prepare for the recount. So I'm really interested to see what those numbers are. I'm also interested to see if the Emmer camp or the Republicans can somehow show to us, find, discover, stumble over some kind of dramatic irregularity in the election. That's some sort of a bombshell. And then I believe we'll, and so those are the two things that I'm waiting for. We really don't have much to see or hear in terms of process until the 23rd when the board meets. So those are the two things. And you're right. Will Tom Emmer come out swinging like Tony Sutton did, or will Tom Emmer be more gubernatorial, I would say? And So that will be fascinating.
Jay, thanks for speaking with us, and we hope to talk to you again kind of throughout this. We expect a recount. It's not certain yet, but we expect it to happen, and as you're an expert on this and on recounts in Minnesota politics, we want to have you here. So, thanks a lot.
Well, thanks for UpTake having me.